going on? Welcome into Matt Bernier Show, DRF TV, live.drf.com, livestream.com, the Daily Racing Forms Twitter handle at DRF Inside Post, as well as the Daily Racing Forms Facebook page. My name is Matt Bernier. You can follow me on Twitter at Bernier_Matt. This is the recap edition, and guess what? This is going to be the first part of a two-part recap edition. There will be no preview show this upcoming week. It will be the recap going over the first 7 Breeders' Cup races of this past weekend, because this one today is going to be the last 7. We're going to go in reverse chronological order. We're going to kick things off with the Breeders' Cup Classic here shortly. If you listen to this in podcast form like most of you do, YouTube, SoundCloud, iTunes, video.drf.com, as well as Spotify. If you're over on YouTube, click that subscribe button. You'll get all the latest from a DRF TV standpoint. Give us a thumbs up as well over on iTunes or Apple Podcasts, whichever way you listen over there. Write us a review. Give us a positive rating. Always greatly appreciated. Again, going to be reverse chronological order, so we will go through the back half, the last 7 races of the Breeders' Cup, which again happened this past weekend down in Louisville, Kentucky at Churchill Downs. The first 7 races will be recapped on Friday's program. I'll also give you some NFL picks, and perhaps we'll take a look at a race, but just based on timing wise, it's already going to be a little bit of a longer show anyway, so that seems a little bit on the unlikely side. Questions, comments, concerns, again, you can fire away at me on Twitter at Bernier_Matt. I will give you fair warning, the fuse is about that short as far as Twitter is concerned. So if you have anything out there and you say anything a little bit sideways, I'm probably not even going to acknowledge you, and there's a chance you might get muted. So fair warning, throwing that out there. We're going to kick things off with the Classic, and I think this is the most important race, obviously, of the Breeders' Cup. This is the thing that's supposed to sort of be the culmination of the entire season. 3-year-olds taking on elders. Perhaps there's some year-end awards on the line. We're going to take a look at the field. There were 14 signed on for this year's Breeders' Cup Classic. $6 million of the purse, 1.25 miles. You already know that. And the post-time favorite was Accelerate, coming in from Southern California for John Sadler. Now, to date, or to this point anyway, John Sadler had still yet to win a Breeders' Cup race. It was something that needed to be acknowledged, and I'll touch on that after we dive into the results and go over that. But it really was sort of the elephant in the room. Was this horse, who had been the best older horse all year, going to be able to get the job done on this stage, given the fact that, you know what, okay, sure, some of the horses had run well, but some at short prices had run poorly for Sadler.
Roaring up between those two as they arrive at the 8th pole. Then Yoshida, Axelrod, Ganavera's closing in late. It is Accelerate. He's coming down to the 16th pole in front. Thunder Snow on the inside is next. Then Mendelssohn, Ganavera, and Yoshida on the far outside. They're coming to the wire, and Accelerate wins the Breeders' Cup Classic for John Sadler.
Ultimately, he gets the job done. Why? Because he's a tremendous horse, and John Sadler's a really good trainer. Accelerate gets the job done in the Grade 1 Breeders' Cup Classic at odds of 5-2. Ganavera, a giant second-place finish beneath Arad Ortiz Jr. at odds of 30-1. Thunder Snow runs third at 14-1. And Yoshida rounds out your Superfecta at odds of 14-1. If you played the exacta for $100, $130. 80 cents. The 50-cent try comes back just over $806, and the 10-cent Superfecta for 10 cents comes back over $1,600. A really strong showing as far as the wagering is concerned and things of that nature for a Breeders' Cup Classic with a 5-2 favorite on top. Let's talk about the Breeders' Cup Classic champion of 2018, Accelerate. He's 10 of 22 lifetime, 20 times in the money from 22 lifetime starts. He is over $5.7 million, just shy of $5.8 million in career earnings, owned by Ronus Racing LLC, trained by John Sadler, bred by Mike Abraham in Kentucky, ridden to victory by Joel Rosario. And you can see the pedigree at the bottom of the horse card. He is by Looking at Lucky, out of an awesome, again, mare named Issues. From a nuts and bolts standpoint, the Breeders' Cup Classic, it's not going to go down as one of the fastest classics from a speed figure standpoint you're ever going to see. Accelerate earns a 105 buyer and a 127 pace-adjusted Timeform US rating. Timeform US had the half, 3/4, and mile splits, all color-coded red, meaning they were fast, which you can certainly understand given the fractions that were thrown out there. You were looking at fractions of 22 and 3, 46 and 2, 10-3 for 3 quarters, 35-4 for the mile. They stopped the clock in 2:02-4. Given the rain that had fallen at Churchill and in Louisville and the days leading up to the Breeders' Cup on Friday and Saturday, you would expect perhaps the track was playing a little bit on the slower side, but I don't believe that to be the case because you saw some pretty gaudy times in some of the other races on the main track. So this one was certainly a bit of an eyesore at the end. They were all sort of staggering home. You had even the closers coming home in 26 and change. You had the horses that showed speed coming home over 27 seconds for that final quarter mile. Far from the fastest finish you're ever going to see, but at the end of the day, when you factor in with a horse like Accelerate, he was wide basically every step of the way, breaking from the far outside 14 post. He carried ground. He loomed up on the far turn with Rosario. He set him down, and he got the job done. This, to me, is a giant effort from this horse. The speed figure, again, may not come back awesome. Comes back solid, not awesome, though. I thought this was arguably one of his best efforts to date. Maybe the Pacific Classic was his crowning achievement, and we'll find out. It sounds like Accelerate. He's going to run one more time. That's the plan. He'll run in the Pegasus World Cup before going off to Stan Stud. I thought it was a big effort, and I'm going to say this here. I had alluded to it when we went over this race in one of the Breeders' Cup focuses. When you talk about Accelerate, I will tell you right now, I'm going to vote for him for Horse of the Year over Justify. There is nothing anyone else can say to change my opinion. I will give you the rationale, whether you agree with it or disagree with it. That's kind of your problem. Accelerate, to me, when you go through and look and see what he's accomplished this year, winning the Santa Anita Handicap, winning the Gold Cup at Santa Anita, winning the Pacific Classic, winning the Breeders' Cup Classic, those 4 races at 1.25 miles at 3 different racetracks, one of them shipping out of his sort of familiar surroundings. And by the way, his only loss this year came to City of Light, who we'll touch on later on in this show, did something pretty big on Saturday afternoon beneath the Twin Spires. Accelerate's overall body of work, to me, is more impressive than Justify winning the Triple Crown. From a speed figure standpoint, Accelerate ran faster than Justify ever ran. From a class standpoint, Accelerate beat better horses than Justify ever beat. If you want to use this race as sort of a barometer, the highest finishing 3-year-old was Mendelssohn, the much maligned Mendelssohn by many people. I thought this was a big effort from him. We'll touch on him again in a little bit. If you look at the horses that he faced at any point Justify throughout those 3 races, you're looking at Lone Sailor, you're looking at Catholic Boy, but he never really even faced Catholic Boy. So to me, he beat what ended up being a less than stellar group of 3-year-olds. My bigger point, and this is the best sort of analogy I could possibly make. If you look at the NCAA basketball tournament every year, it happens every year, and it's a bunch of kids in college. And at the end of the tournament, there is a most outstanding player awarded. Kind of call it the MVP, but it's not most valuable player. It's the most outstanding player. The equivalent of taking a horse that only ran in the Triple Crown races and 3-year-old restricted races and saying that he's Horse of the Year, that to me would be the same sort of thing as taking the most outstanding player in the NCAA tournament and saying that for the year, he was Basketball Player of the Year, ahead of all the other players that play in the NBA, whether it's LeBron James or James Harden or Steph Curry or Kevin Durant or Anthony Davis or any of them. That to me sounds so absurd. It's not funny. And people will take this the wrong way and say, well, this is a knock against Justify. It's not a knock against Justify. You cannot take away what he accomplished. He's the 13th Triple Crown winner ever. But just at the bare bones of it, when you look at it, how illogical does that sound? A horse that never faced older horses, never ran faster than the older horses or his main competitor, Accelerate. Why? What? Just because we build the Triple Crown to be the end-all, be-all? I'm probably on an island with this. The idea of a age-restricted series, no matter how difficult it is, being the end-all, be-all, and especially when you compare it to a campaign like Accelerate has had, just seems ridiculous to me. I think, on the whole, Accelerate's overall body of work culminating in beating the best older horses that were basically all over the world, because you did have Thunder Snow come over here. You did have Roaring Lion, whether he wants the dirt or not, or he wanted the dirt or not. Clearly he didn't. But the point is, he took on the best of the best outside of his comfort zone, and he got the job done. I would give a horse like Justify the horse of the year without question had he gone and run in a race like this and won, or at least was right there with Accelerate. I would at least consider it. But to me, if he had beaten Accelerate, for sure, horse of the year. But he never even faced him. So I'm sitting here thinking, well, would he have progressed and beaten him? Maybe. Who knows? Maybe it's even probable. But he never faced him. So how can I sit here and say that his year was better than this horse's? He never ran as fast as him. He never beat better quality than he did. And by the way, he never raced past the first weekend in June. That to me is a problem. This horse, Accelerate, ran the entire year. Why is it different than American Pharoah? American Pharoah showed up and beat older horses in the Breeders' Cup. Justify never did. I'm voting for Accelerate. And that's my case. I'm sticking to it. As far as the rest of the field is concerned, can't touch on everyone just from a timing standpoint. We'll touch on some of the horses that are confirmed to be, their plans are confirmed. Yoshida, he's going to go on. They'll continue on with the dirt campaign. Potential next start is in the Pegasus. Thought he ran just fine. Oh, and we need to touch on the John Sadler piece real quick. Congratulations to John Sadler. Well deserved. He has had a number of Breeders' Cup starters, no question about it. But there were a number of people on Twitter that said, you need to stop talking about the number. That to me is absurd. That's part of the story. And the reason that it was part of the story is because John Sadler is as good as he is. It's no different than when Phil Mickelson, for the longest time, when are you going to win the major? When are you going to win a major? Any major. Not anyone in particular. Forget the U.S. Open, where he was the runner-up at that point on 4 or 5 different occasions. Now I think he's been second 6 times. The point is, the reason that you keep being asked is because you are that good. When you've won basically everything else, people are asking why. When are you going to get one? So for the folks that were saying it shouldn't have been talked about and the numbers and this, that, and the other thing, you're totally missing the point. That had to be talked about. And you know what? He got the job done. So it won't be talked about now. And Mickelson's record leading up to that point, guess what? It's not talked about anymore. He's gone on to win 5 more majors. John Sadler, I'm sure, is going to go on to win a number more Breeders' Cups, whichever races they're in. But to suggest that it should not have been discussed is again, foolish. It was part of the story. You had to acknowledge it. Especially when earlier in the day you had seen a horse like Catalina Cruiser stop as badly as he did. Now, Catapult just 3 races prior in a giant race. But the fact is, it was still part of the story. But hats off to John Sadler. Again, he's a great trainer. That's why the question was being asked. When are you going to get one? You have to acknowledge it. We haven't had any success yet. Finally, got over the hump. And he deserves it. With this horse specifically, I almost feel like it's fitting that this is the horse that got him off the duck. Because Accelerate, you can make the case to me anyway, is the best horse he's ever had and the best training job he's ever done. Anyway, let's move back on to Yoshida. Sounds like the Pegasus World Cup, the dirt race, is on the docket for him. Thought he ran fine, had a great pace to run at, as did Gunnavera. I thought Thunder Snow, the 3rd place finisher, ran a giant race given where he was on the racetrack, flattened out at the end. I assume they're going to probably go on with him over to Dubai as a 5-year-old. We'll find out, though. TBD. Mendelssohn, I think he's all done here. I think they're going to go and send him off to stud. Again, it's just a wicked pace. This is 2 races in a row, which I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing. I like that he could adapt to the American running style, but the problem is, if you're going that fast and you got nothing left in the tank at the end, you're not going to win many of these races. So I love Mendelssohn. I think he was a great talent. If we never see him again, hopefully he goes off and passes on those good genes. But I'd be lying if I said I wasn't a little bit disappointed in the fact that it just felt like, especially these last 2 races, it was all in early and just pray that you can stick around. And realistically, that's not a style that's going to work for anyone. Lone Sailor, great effort from that horse. I thought it was a great ride from James Graham. Take him all the way back. Just wait. That pace was hot. Come with a run. Big effort to finish 6th. West Coast was terrible. McKinsey was terrible. West Coast is all done. He's going to go off the lane's end and stand as a stud. McKinsey will be back as a 4-year-old. McKinsey, perhaps it was a combination of being too close to that pace, but my goodness, you want to talk about coming apart at the seams. Sure, the pace was fast, but it didn't disintegrate really. And with the exception of McKinsey, he was up the track. He was nowhere at the end of this thing. I never thought he wanted to go this far, but I thought from a talent standpoint, you could project that forward move. I still think he's a really talented horse, but I don't know I don't know what his best game is going to be next year as a 4-year-old. Discreet Lover, it's a great story for Uriah St. Louis and Manny Franco. Just not quite up to par with this because he got a great pace set up again in this spot and he just didn't really come with the run. Axelrod, I think, ran a deceivingly good race. You take a look and see he finished 9th, beaten quite a bit. I think his race was really quite strong. He was mid-pack. Or he first initially was toward the rear. He made up a little bit of ground mid-pack, put in a legitimate mid-move going into the far turn, and turning for home. He was at least there. He was involved, and he flattened out down the lane. 2 pieces to that. Making that mid-move into the teeth of the pace, I think that took its toll. I also don't think the distance is his friend. I don't think he's a 1.25 mile horse. If you want to just throw out crazy, bold sort of predictions going forward, we know he's running as a 4-year-old. I would put Axelrod on the short list of horses that could be big, particularly in a race like the Metropolitan Handicap. I feel like the Met Mile is going to be a bread and butter kind of race for a horse like Axelrod. We'll find out. Other spots, 1 1/8, I don't think is ideal for him. I think he's capable at it, and I think he's going to continue to improve. But I think Axelrod's a really talented horse. Pavel looked like he was involved for a little bit, flattened out. Mind Your Biscuits was terrible. He was my pick in here, and I know he was wide, but he never looked like he was going to run at any step, at any point in the race. Really disappointing effort there. They are up in the air right now. It'll either be the Cigar Mile or he will be retired and go off to Japan to be a sire. We'll find out. But again, really just he did what I didn't think he was capable of doing. My whole logic with him was I wanted the most consistent horse who I didn't think was going to throw in a clunker. And guess what? Of all days to throw in the clunker, Mind Your Biscuits picked this one. It is what it is. He's still a really nice horse. If he does race once more, he's going to be an animal. A serious player in that race in New York. We'll find out if they do choose to go there. We've already talked about McKinsey. Catholic Boy. He didn't get out of the gate very well. Apparently exited the race with a pretty serious gash on his left front ankle. Was that part of it? Certainly. That's probably not going to help his cause. He just never got out of the gate with that. Moved up a little bit, but he never threatened. Javier wrapped up on him. He's going to be back as a 4-year-old. It sounds like he will run on both turf and dirt as a 4-year-old. And I think Catholic Boy, you could look at him and project going forward that perhaps he's one of the early contenders for Horse of the Year in 2019. Especially if they do choose to run him in the biggest races on turf and dirt. I know Jonathan Thomas had mentioned the Whitney being one of the main goals, which makes all the sense in the world. He likes Saratoga. It's one of the most prestigious races for older horses and whatnot. And Roaring Lion, who rounds out the field of 14. Look, they took a chance. It was basically the owner's call. He couldn't take to the dirt. The Kitten's Joy offspring, they cannot run on dirt. Or they just aren't, not at the highest level anyway, let's put it that way. Don't hold this against him. He's going to be retired and go off and be a sire. And again, it seems like he was basically the best middle distance horse in Europe all year. And you know what? There's a real scenario where he goes off and produces some nice horses going forward. So the Breeders' Cup Classic 2018, it is in the books. Accelerate. He wins. He caps off a fantastic 2018 campaign. A tremendous ride from Joel Rosario, who is going to be going west for the winter. He'll be riding out at Santa Anita. A great job by John Sadler. A much-deserved victory. Finally, he's got the Breeders' Cup sort of monkey off his back. And now I'm sure this will be just the beginning of bigger and better things going forward. I'm sure he'll end up going off and winning a number of them before it's all said and done. Like I said, it feels very much like a Phil Mickelson sort of thing. I believe there was the joke that came out in the Breeders' Cup, the betting show, the Susan Lucci sort of situation where it took a while, but she finally got one. Here it is. John Sadler's got his. The Ronas brothers, congratulations to them as well. Accelerate. Your 2018 Breeders' Cup Classic champion. He's going to get at least one vote for Horse of the Year. It's going to come from me, and I suspect there'll be a few other folks voting for him as well. It'll be interesting to see how things shake down between Accelerate and Justify for Horse of the Year. Accelerate, 2018 Breeders' Cup Classic champion. 10th race on Saturday was the Grade 1 Breeders' Cup Turf, a mile and a half over what was officially listed as good going, but you have to consider it a little bit worse than that, and that's being kind considering the amount of rain that fell, the condition of the turf course on Friday, and even the condition of the turf course on Saturday. We had seen earlier races produce some very, very slow times. This race, in the grand scheme of things, it wasn't a painfully slow time, but I think that's mainly a product of the top two fillies. You can take a look at the field. 13 of them were signed on. All eyes were on Enable, the super filly, arguably the best horse in the world. She would put her right there with a horse like Winks. She was going for the elusive double, the ARC Breeders' Cup Turf double. It had not been successfully completed to date, in the same year, I should say. All eyes were on her, but Aidan O'Brien was coming with some pretty live chances as well. Most notably, Magical, a 3-year-old filly taking on her elders, getting a little bit of a weight allowance. Not sure many people thought it would be this close if she was going to get the job done, but in fact it was. The stretch run of this year's Breeders' Cup Turf.
Side run, and they're into the stretch, and the two fillies are 1-2, Magical and Enable, and they kick on from Saddler's Joy. It's Enable on the outside, in the center of the turf course. She has taken the lead, and she's pulling away from Magical, who continues to battle her, though. It's these two, 1-2 down to the finish. Enable and Magical, and they're well clear of the others. Racing Royalty, Enable and Frankie Dettori. The ARC winner is the Breeders' Cup Turf winner, too.
Enable gets the job done. She is the first horse in history to win the Arc de Triomphe as well as the Breeders' Cup Turf in the same year. She wins at odds of 4-5. Magical runs her eyes out. Giant effort from her to run second at odds of 10-1 beneath Ryan Moore. Saddler's Joy, one of the American horses, runs third at odds of 37-1, and Arklow runs fourth at odds of 53-1. Let's discuss Enable a little bit. The super filly, she is 4 years old. She has won 10 of 11 starts lifetime, only one loss to date, and she finished third that day. She is over $10 million in career earnings, $10.7 million to be exact. Owned by Juddmonte Farms Limited, trained by John Gosden, bred by Juddmonte Farms Limited in Great Britain. Ridden to victory by Frankie Dettori. You can see the pedigree at the bottom of the horse card. She's by Nathaniel out of a Sadler's Wells mare named Concentric. From a speed figure standpoint, this was an exceptional effort from both of the fillies. 133 time form U.S. ratings, pace adjusted. For each of them, Enable earns a 114 by her speed figure and a 113 for Magical. When you look and see a horse like Saddler's Joy, we know Saddler's Joy here in the United States. His MO is a big late finish. Now, he may not love ground with some cut, and again, it was officially listed as good. I think it was still probably slightly closer to yielding, but that's just my opinion. I didn't get out there on the turf course. I know on Friday there were a number of folks saying that turf was proper yielding, if not soft, and instead it was still officially listed as good, which is very unfair to the players, because that's not an accurate assessment of what you're dealing with. There are ways to do it in a much more legitimate sort of fashion to gauge how soft any given turf course is. Another story for another day. The fact that Saddler's Joy got his final quarter mile in 26:52 over testing ground, not a bad time in the grand scheme of things. Compare that to the top two, who, by the way, were 9 lengths clear of Saddler's Joy. Magical comes home in 25:23, which, again, given the circumstances, is an enormous late finish. Enable came home in 25:08. Truly a special filly. Really impressive. Seeing her in the flesh. Look, I'm not sure there's anything else that you can say about her that hasn't already been said. She's borderline an all-timer. I don't even want to say borderline. She is an all-timer. She's a dual ARC winner. She's a Breeders' Cup Turf winner. She's beaten boys on a number of occasions. She's trained by John Gosden. Frankie rides her. I mean, Juddmonte, you have really all the pieces to a giant storyline here. Perhaps a bigger storyline exiting this race is that it's not 100% that she's done. Prince Khalid Abdullah is the head of Juddmonte, and Lord Teddy Grimthorpe is the racing manager. They were They wanted to just say, we're going to enjoy it for a little bit and we'll do right by the filly. If she's able to go on, they'll go on. And if she's not, they won't. But it's not 100% that she's done racing, which would be a thrill if she came back as a 5-year-old. As far as Magical is concerned, she is going to come back for Aidan O'Brien, go on to a 4-year-old campaign, which, look, if Enable doesn't come back, and even if she does, I think this race at least suggests that Magical is ready to take that next step. And again, if you think there's that logical sort of maturation in the progression from 3 to 4, Magical could certainly be a fair competitor for Enable going forward if Enable comes back as a 5-year-old. And if she doesn't, Magical all of a sudden would probably go right to the top of the list worldwide as far as turf horses are concerned, again, with the exception perhaps of Winx. As far as the 3rd and 4th place finishers here are concerned, Sadler's Joy, he is going to come back. They're going to run him again, and there's a part of me that doesn't believe he is quite as good as he once was, but that doesn't mean that he still can't be effective. It sounds like he'll head on down to South Florida, and they'll go on from there for Tom Albertrani. And Arklow, the 4th place finisher, Brad Cox, has made mention that there's a scenario where they run in the turf portion of the Pegasus World Cup down at Gulfstream in January. So the top 4, there's a little bit of heads up with those horses. As far as the rest of the field is concerned, Waldgeist, you'd heard some rumblings that he wasn't loving life when he got over here. Not a great effort from him, only a 90 Byron and 118 Timeform US rating. He's better than that. I would imagine if he goes on, he'll do better over in Europe. Talismanic probably wants firmer going. Not a terrible effort from him, but certainly not what we saw last year out of Del Mar over that firm going when he won the Breeders' Cup Turf. Robert Bruce, I think it's plain and simple. I don't think he wants any sort of real cut in the ground. I think he is a firm turf specialist. And to be fair, I do think, personally, I think this distance is a little bit far for him. I think he's better at the 1.25 mile, 1.125 type races. Hunting Horn, he was basically in there trying to run interference with Enable. He had hemmed her in for the longest time. Some team tactics. Notice no one's really making too much stink about that, but go all the way back to the Belmont Stakes when Baffert used Restoring Hope as basically... look, I gave him a chance as just a flyer in that spot, but Baffert used Restoring Hope to ensure that there was pace and to, sort of make sure that there was a little bit of, call it what you will, team tactics. People were losing their minds about that. I thought it was fair game. Justify was the best horse anyway, so what difference does it make? In this spot here, you know what? They tried. O'Brien's group, but it just, Enable was just the best horse. I don't have any problem with that. High Happy showed some speed, faded. Don't think he's in the form that he once was. Not also sold about the give in the ground for him. A couple other horses. Really disappointing effort from Channel Maker and Glorious Empire. Those are the 2 horses coming out of those Saratoga races. And then Channel Maker came back and ran a giant race at Belmont Park over testing ground, and he was done early. I liked him. Maybe it was just me. Maybe there was too much weight on his back. Terrible effort from him. Terrible effort from Glorious Empire. You just hope that they're okay. And Liam the Charmer, truth be told, he's not of this caliber. And when you give him some turf that he's just totally unfamiliar with, I don't think that was ever going to work for him. This was a phenomenal show. I would argue the performances of the entire festival, whatever you'd like to call it, the little boutique meet, the Breeders' Cup, with the exception maybe of the 2-year-old, who we'll talk about on Friday. Enable and Magical put on a show, and it was phenomenal. The 2 fillies, they go out there, they strut their stuff. Enable gets the job done. She is the first horse in the same calendar year to win the Arc de Triomphe as well as the Breeders' Cup Turf. She earns a 114 Beyer speed figure and a 133 Timeform US rating. We will find out. Nothing confirmed, but the door has been slightly left ajar. Perhaps we get to see her as a 5-year-old. If we don't, she's going to go down as one of the best of all time. I would imagine there's a real case where you can make that statement, where maybe she is one of the all-time greats as far as turf is concerned. Certainly one of the more recent greats anyway, over the past 5 to 10 years. Enable, a true superstar. She gets the job done in the turf. Breeders' Cup Distaff moved back to Saturday for the first time in a number of years. This is really where it belongs. It's one of the marquee events. Felt like it was kind of lost, and I know it was supposed to be its own, have its own headlining day on Friday, but I think this is the right move. Move it to Saturday. Have it be part of the late pick 4, the late pick 5, the pick 6, the whole 9, because it is one of the main events of this entire Breeders' Cup Festival. Take a look at the field. 11 of them were signed on here. Post-time favorite, Monomoy Girl, the 2018 Kentucky Oaks winner. She basically won everything there was to win this year, with the exception of her most recent start, the Cotillion. She did happen to finish first that day, but she was disqualified and placed second with Midnight Bisou involved. Midnight Bisou was in here. She ended up being the third choice at odds of 5-1. Second choice, if you're looking for an alternative, probably Abel Tasman, who on her best day was certainly capable of winning a race like this. The problem was she was coming into this race on the heels of an absolute disaster in the Zenyatta. She ultimately went off at odds of 2-1. And she was a non-factor, but Monomoy Girl, you want to talk about sitting a sweet trip and being much the best. Here's the stretch run.
Eyes runs at her. The two of them turn for home with Midnight Bisou, third on the outside. 3/16 to go. Monomoy Girl to catch. Florent Giroux goes to an all-out drive. Blue Prize trying to stick with her. Midnight Bisou continues to move down the center. Monomoy Girl at 16th to go. Blue Prize, Wildcat finishing well on the inside. Then comes Midnight Bisou. Monomoy Girl has won the distaff.
Monomoy Girl, the G. Monomoy Girl gets the job done in the 2018 Breeders' Cup Distaff at odds of 9-5. She defeats Wildcat, who comes with a very, very nice late finish for Jose Ortiz at odds of 6-1, and Midnight Bisou runs third at odds of 5-1. Blue Prize rounds out your superfecta at odds of 8-1. Let's discuss Monomoy Girl a little bit more. She is a 3-year-old filly, and she's done nothing wrong thus far. She is 9 of 11 lifetime, 11 for 11 in the exacta. The only loss, one of them, was last year as a 2-year-old, and one of them was that disqualification, placing her second behind Midnight Bisou, just under $3 million in career earnings, owned by a whole slew of people. Dub, Monomoy Stables LLC, the Elkstone Group LLC, and Bethlehem Stables. Trained by Brad Cox, bred by FPF LLC and Highfield Ranch in Kentucky. Ridden to victory by Florent Giroux, and you can see the pedigree at the bottom of the horse card. She's by Tapazar, out of a Henny Hughes mare named Drumette. I thought Flo gave her the perfect ride, but you know what? It is one of those things. When you have a horse that is this upwardly mobile, you're going to work out a pretty darn good trip more often than not. But again, this is that trip. I keep going back, and there's a theme. It's many of the best horses that we've had in the past 5-10 years. It's the American Pharoah trip. It's the Justify trip. It's the Wise Dan trip. It's the Tepin trip. You name it. It's the California Chrome trip. You go up there. You can go to the lead if it's given to you. It's the Beholder trip. It's the Rachel Alexander trip. Or you sit just off a target, off their flank, and really whenever you're ready to go, you go. She's really, there's nothing to knock about her. She's really, really strong. You look at some of the figures, perhaps they're a little bit on the light side for a race like the Distaff, but in the grand scheme of things, the 96 buyer, the 122 time form US rating, I don't know that they entirely tell the story here. I feel like I don't think she was ever going to lose this race when you watched her travel out there. And I think if they had to run it again, I know Wildcat finished with the flurry, but I just think Monomoy Girl was just much the best in there. And look, I was trying to beat her because I looked at it and said Abel Tasman. I thought her best was better than anyone else's best. We'll get to Abel Tasman in a minute, but we certainly didn't get her best. Monomoy Girl, I don't have anything to knock. She's just a professional. She goes out there, she gets it done. Brad Cox, biggest win of his career. Florent Giroux, it's not the biggest win of his career, but boy, all of a sudden, Flo in the past 2 years has got a beautiful sort of resume put together here. All those big 3-year-old filly races that he's had with Monomoy Girl. You got the Breeders' Cup Classic last year with Gun Runner. You got a number of big grade ones with Gun Runner. Really, he's got a couple of nice horses over these past few years. And good, he's a nice guy. Florent, I like him. It sounds like there's a possibility that she runs in the Pegasus World Cup against the boys down at Gulfstream Park. At the very least, the Distaff would be a long-term type of goal in 2019 for her. Monomoy Girl will be back. It sounds like the top 4 are all going to be back. Wildcat likely to remain in training. I thought this was a beautiful ride from Jose Ortiz. The pace may not have been just really like smoking up front when you consider 23 and 147 and 12 for 3/4. So perhaps she was a little bit far back, but I liked that he just weaved through that traffic on the far turn, angled her back down to the inside. She came home in 12:36. This is certainly the best she has looked since she's been here in the United States for Chad Brown. Chad had always spoken highly of this horse, and in those 3 races, I hadn't seen it. I was like, I don't totally get it. She's fine, but I'd have a hard time imagining her winning this race. Well, guess what? She came darn close. It was a big effort from her to come from the back of the pack. I feel like additional distance is the way that she finished here anyway. Is probably good for her, but at the same time, some of those other races I looked at it and said she was just kind of moving up and down. So I still don't have a very good read on her. There's clearly some ability here, and again, I thought it was a great ride from Jose Ortiz. Midnight Bisou, John Velasquez had the mount here. She was wide throughout, but I don't think that really cost her too much in the grand scheme of things. I'm not totally convinced that the rail's where you wanted to be on the main track on Friday or Saturday. And she finished with some interest. I still don't think this distance is ideal for her. I think she is better going shorter. Probably 7/8 of a mile, I think, is her best distance. She's going to remain in training. I don't think she can win any year-end awards. I would still at least consider running her in the La Brea if she is all good and sound and ready to roll. On opening day out at Santa Anita, 7/8 of a mile, an age-restricted grade 1. And you couple that, now again, if you look at it just strictly from a breeding standpoint, she's already a grade 1 winner going longer, albeit by disqualification, winning that cotillion. But then all of a sudden, if you could add a grade 1 sprinting, I just think that helps her overall resume. I would personally, if I had anything to do with the horse, I would be pointing to a race like that if she is ready to go. If not, you put her away and you bring her back for the big races next year as a 4-year-old. And Blue Prize is just honest. For a minute there, turning for home, looked like she was involved with a big chance, and she just flattened out down the lane. I don't think she is as good as those top 3 very clearly, but she's honest. She shows up, she runs a race more often than not. We have to discuss the 2 just complete no-shows. I mean, if you had told me at the beginning of the day that Baffert would run last and second to last in any of the Breeders' Cup races, I would have said, what are you talking about? Well, that's exactly what happened. He runs 10th and 11th in the distaff with Vale Dory and Abel Tasman. Now look, Vale Dory probably not truly grade 1 caliber at this point anyway in her career. I know she had won that grade 1 Zenyatta most recently, but she had certainly lost a little bit on the fastball. She's a complete no-show here. She's been retired. She's going to go off to be a mom. Abel Tasman, the same can be said. She is going to be retired. She's going off to be a mom. You want to talk about just a complete conundrum, and it just happens with horses sometimes where they just shut it down. I wanted to try to make the case that that most recent run, she had shown a little bit of that earlier this year in the La Troyenne where she was just not good, but then she came back and fired those 2 giant shots in New York. She was terrible in the Zenyatta, and I said, I still kind of maintain this. As good as Monomoy Girl has been, I still feel like Abel Tasman's best was simply is better than anything anyone else in this field is capable of. The problem is she didn't show that, and she didn't show a fraction of what her best is. And maybe we're just at that point where she just doesn't want to do it anymore. Baffert was quoted saying she just quit. She just quit running. Sometimes they do that. She just doesn't want to run anymore, it looks like. You have to wonder, and this is just me sort of throwing it out there, and I had thrown it out there when we talked about the distaff and leading up to it. You wonder if that war up at Saratoga between Abel Tasman and Elate just broke both of them. Now, we'll find out. Hopefully, we get Elate back as a 5-year-old. We'll find out. I haven't heard anything one way or the other, but those 2 ran so hard that day, and Elate comes out of it with an injury, and Abel Tasman comes out of it with just 2 dreadful efforts. You wonder if they both just redlined that day. You know, did they both blow the engine, so to speak? And they ran unbelievable races up there, but it just sapped all the energy out of them. It's possible. Wouldn't be the first time it's happened. That's what I think happened with Arrogate in the Dubai World Cup. He blew the engine. It was just such an unbelievable effort. He went at 10,000 RPMs, and that was it. It just wasn't the same after that. I wonder if you can say the same for Abel Tasman. We'll find out about it late, but so far, it's at least trended that race took something significant out of her. It is what it is. They're both very, very talented, great fillies over the past couple of years, but certainly not the way that the connections would have liked Abel Tasman to go out. Monomoy Girl, on the other hand, it looks like we're going to get her for another 4-year-old, for another year as a 4-year-old, and couple that with a chance that she might take on the boys in the Pegasus World Cup. We'll find out if that comes to fruition. If it doesn't, it seems like a long-term goal would be the Breeders' Cup Distaff again. Look, a deserving 3-year-old champion. In any other year with a softer sort of group for Horse of the Year, I think you could make a case for Monomoy Girl. I would probably put her up there as far as a finalist for Horse of the Year. I don't think she has any chance to win it, but she's certainly going to be 3-year-old filly champion. And who knows, next year, bigger and better things. Monomoy Girl caps off a tremendous 2018 campaign, a tremendous 3-year-old campaign. She is the 2018 Breeders' Cup Distaff winner. From a quality standpoint, this year's Breeders' Cup Mile might have been a little bit suspect, which led us to just a wide open betting affair. But at the same time, it was a pretty solid group, all things considered, and it was a great betting opportunity. You could go a few different ways. Let's take a look at the field. Post-time favorite ended up being Oscar Performance, and you can understand Oscar Performance on his best day is one of the best milers we have here in the United States, no question about it. But he was coming into this race on the heels of a pretty soft trip, winning gate-to-wire fashion of the Woodbine Mile. If you didn't like him, you had plenty of interesting alternatives, whether it was some Europeans being like Expert Eye or One Master or Gustav Klimt or Mustachery or any of those kind of horses, or if you so chose, some of our domestic horses. You had a horse like Catapult or Analyze It. Perhaps he'd get back to his best form. Ultimately, what you got was a very, very exciting finish. Here's the stretch run of the mile.
VZ Darrow on the far outside comes on. Catapult in between those two as they arrive at the 8th pole. And then it's Lightning Spear and Expert Eye on the outside. Analyze It digs in. Catapult alongside. DeVZ Darrow down the middle. It's Analyze It. Catapult. DeVZ Darrow, One Master coming late. Expert Eye on the far outside. They're coming down to the line. Here's Expert Eye and Frankie. They got up the win in the last strides.
Expert Eye gets the job done. We already talked about Juddmonte and Frankie, but guess what? They do it again. They have another Breeders' Cup winner here at odds of 5-1. Catapult runs second for John Sadler at odds of 7-1. Analyze It, the pace setter, runs third at odds of 6-1, and Divisadero runs fourth at odds of 43-1. Let's take a look a little bit deeper at your winner, Expert Eye. Expert Eye is a pretty solid horse at this point in his career, no question about it. 5 of 10 lifetime, 8 times in the money from 10 lifetime starts, $1.8 million in career earnings, owned by Juddmonte Farms Incorporated, trained by Sir Michael Stout, bred by Juddmonte Farms Limited in Great Britain, ridden to victory by Frankie Dettori, and you can see the pedigree at the bottom of the horse card. He's by acclamation out of a Dancilli mare named Exemplify. Now, again, I made mention it's not maybe a stellar edition of this race, especially when you look at the figures. From a time form standpoint, slightly better than the buyers. Time form, pace adjusted number for Expert Eye, 124, Catapult 124, Analyze It 125, Divisadero 124. On the buyer side of things, Expert Eye earns a 101, and the next 3 finishers all earn 100 buyers. When you look and see the final time, they stopped the clock in 1:39.4. I believe this is the slowest Breeders' Cup mile in history. So much of that, though, had to do with this turf course. A few things that we can talk about. Expert Eye, Frankie, I believe, at one point even said it. He goes, in deep stretch, or mid-stretch, rather, we were in trouble. This horse was just kind of spinning his wheels, and I think perhaps it was a combination of him continuing to just kind of plug along, and look, he came home in 24:44. That's faster than basically everyone else in this race. But I think it was also a product of those horses in front of him getting a little bit tired, feeling the effects of that boggy turf course. Catapult set a pretty good trip, all things considered, just off the pace. He came with his bid and just couldn't quite get there, but a good effort from him nonetheless. And really, Sadler's done a phenomenal job with him, because when he was here on the East Coast with Chad got some success out of him, but we know Chad is the best turf trainer in the country, if not arguably right there with O'Brien in the world. And you obviously throw John Gosden in there as well. You know, the fact that Sadler has gotten this much more out of Catapult, I think is just, to me, I said it weeks ago, I think Catapult is the best training job that Sadler has ever done. Now, perhaps Accelerate is the best horse, and he has the biggest sort of accolades. But, boy, considering what he's gotten out of Catapult, I think you can make a serious case that this training job from John Sadler is as good as, if not better than, what he's done with Accelerate. Analyze It, good to see him get back to his best form. I think this distance is probably best form. The fact that he stuck around as long as he did, I think that's a testament to him. This is what he wants to do. I'll be very interested to see if he continues on. I would imagine he'll go on as a 4-year-old, and if he does, where do they choose to go with him? My heart was jumping out of my chest, turning for home. I thought, look, Divisadero gave me a thrill. I picked him in this race. He was my Arkong bet, the big bomber. Gave him out all weekend, and for turning for home, it looked like he was there, and he acquitted himself very nicely as the second longest shot on the board at odds of 43-1, only to lose by 3/4 of a length. He gets back to his best form. There's something about that Churchill Downs turf course that he just absolutely adores. He couldn't quite get there, but he gave me a thrill on a weekend that, for the most part, or a Saturday anyway, that was certainly a forgettable one for me. As far as the rest of the field is concerned, not a heck of a lot, other than Oscar Performance. We need to touch on him briefly, because He just totally missed the break. And at that point, when you are behind essentially the entire field over that kind of turf course, I'm just not convinced he was ever going to love life. I kind of want to give him the benefit of the doubt here, because I don't think this certainly wasn't an indicative effort from him. We know he's capable of better on his best day. It is just, this isn't the race that you want to hold against him. Let's put it that way. If you want to hold the Arlington Million against him, if you want to look at that race up at Woodbine and say you had everything go your way, that's fine. But I don't think you can use this race, the Breeders' Cup Mile, as the race to say one way or the other whether you think this horse can still run, or you think he's a top-level runner, or you're just trying to fade him. Because I don't think he ever got a real opportunity. You would like to think that he would have been in a similar position to that of Catapult and Analyze, and if he was, and he could handle the going, perhaps he is the one that gets right there at the wire. Who knows? We'll never know. But you're not supposed to hold this race against him, given the fact that he didn't get out of the gate. Expert Eye. He gets the job done here. Sounds like they're up in the air. He may end up staying in training. He may end up retiring or going off to stud. For what it's worth, John Sadler has said that Catapult is a live and prime contender, or at least a probable runner, in that Pegasus World Cup on turf, how they have split that up where you have a dirt and a turf race. Catapult is a likely runner in that spot on the grass down at Gulfstream Park here in a few months. But the rest of the field has really not been a ton publicized one way or the other at this point. We'll find out in the days to come, in the weeks to come, where some of these horses will show up again. But Expert Eye, he gets the job done in this year's Breeders' Cup Mile, a wide open edition of the Breeders' Cup Mile. 124 time form US rating, 101 Beyer speed figure. To me, going into this year's Breeders' Cup, the Sprint was arguably the best race on paper. Might not have been the largest field, might not have been the race that you were most likely to win boatloads of cash, but I thought top to bottom quality-wise, it was the best and perhaps would provide the best race and the best efforts. Here's the field, only 9 of them signed on, and really, of the 9, no disrespect to the horses that ran 6, 7, 8, 9. It felt like there were 5 horses, and you could make your case for any one of the 5, whether it was Promises Fulfilled, Imperial Hint, Limousine Liberal, Roy H., Whitmore. You could make legitimate cases for any one of the 5. Ultimately, kind of a one-horse race. Here's the stretch run of the Sprint.
Roy H. has circled up to take the lead at the top of the stretch, right by Promises Fulfilled. Imperial Hint is trying to close on the outside. Then Distinctive B. Whitmore is making progress. Here he comes splitting horses. Roy H. has got a big lead, though. At the 16th pole, he's 4 in front. Whitmore closes the gap into second as they come to the line. Roy H. does it again. He won it by 4 lengths under Paco Lopez.
Roy H. repeats as champion of the Breeders' Cup Sprint, and I would imagine very likely puts himself in great position to repeat as champion sprinter. He gets the job done as the second choice at odds of 5-2. Whitmore runs a very, very strong effort, a strong second at 6-1. Imperial Hint rounds out your trifecta as the beaten 8-5 favorite. Promises Fulfilled runs fourth at odds of 9-2. Let's talk about Roy H. a little bit more, shall we? He is rock solid. He's 6 years old. At this point in his career, he just shows up and runs his race more often than not. Now, I wasn't convinced he was in the best form coming into this, but boy, he proved me wrong. He's 9 of 22 lifetime, 7 other times in the money, over $3 million in career earnings, owned by Rockingham Ranch and David A. Burnson, LLC, trained by Peter Miller, bred by Ramona S. Bass, LLC, in Kentucky, ridden to victory by Paco Lopez. You can see the pedigree at the bottom of the horse card. He's by More Than Ready out of an elusive quality mare named Elusive Diva. From a speed figure standpoint, this was the good Roy H. 111 Beyer, 128 time form US rating in the Breeders' Cup Sprint. Whitmore running second, a 104 Beyer and a 119 time form US rating. And Imperial Hint, a 118 time form US rating and a 99 Beyer speed figure. Other interesting numbers to throw out there with Promises Fulfilled, given these numbers that I'm giving you from a time form standpoint are pace incorporated or pace is factored in. Promises Fulfilled actually earned the second highest number in the race with a 122, only a 98 Beyer because the Beyers are strictly from the final clocking. For what it's worth, the fractions 21, 35, 44, 21. And the final time of 1:08.24. Roy H. never looked like a loser at any point. He was out in the clear. He cruised. Paco set him down, and he finished like a house of fire. This was really, really an impressive effort from Roy H. Again, back to his best form, I think, from 2017. And I wasn't totally convinced that we were going to get that coming in here. You knew his best was going to be pretty darn tough to beat, and that's exactly what you got. Imperial Hint, the third place finisher. I was concerned coming into it that he didn't get enough fitness out of the Vosburg, which was his prep coming into the sprint. Many people continued to point to the Churchill Downs factor. I suppose, I guess it depends how you want to look at it. I don't think he ran poorly. It certainly wasn't his best effort. It seems like most people, including his trainer, Louis Carvajal Jr., they have concerns about the racetrack, and they think that Churchill Downs is the reasoning. The quote from Carvajal afterward, "I had my doubts about Churchill Downs coming in while hoping the first two races here were about the distance more than the track. But it's obvious now he just doesn't like this track." Javier said he just didn't handle it. It's going to be interesting to see what we get from Roy H. and Imperial Hint. Roy H. is going back to California. Imperial Hint is going down to Tampa Bay Downs. They're both possibly being pointed to the Dubai Golden Shaheen out at Meydan. That will be coming up at the end of March. So I'm sure you would have races leading into that if that is where they end up going. But it's worth noting that is where the potential target is for them early on in the campaign. Whitmore, the runner-up, a little bit unfortunate that he got out of the gate as slowly as he did. You'd like to think if he's a little bit more forward, I don't think it's enough to make up the 3 1/4 length difference between he and Roy H., but perhaps he just narrows the gap a little bit. He came with a nice run. I thought Ricardo Santana gave him a very, very nice ride inside, tipped out, angled back down to the rail, tipped back out again. It was one of those things, and again, I realize that it sounds like there's a lot of moving parts there, and again, the shortest distance between points is 2 points is a straight line, but at the same point, I feel like there's a scenario where that was as good as Santana could have ridden this horse and gave him every opportunity. And again, he just wasn't as good as Roy H. on this given day. He will be going down to Oaklawn Park, and the first primary goal for them and these connections with Ron Moquette in 2019 is the Grade 3 Count Fleet down there. And again, we know he has an affinity for that racetrack. Promises fulfilled, showed big speed. This has been a relatively long campaign for him. If you think back to the early on the Triple Crown Trail, trying to get to the Derby, he ran in the Derby, ran in a few different races. The Woody Stevens went up to Saratoga and blitzed those races. And then he had a very tough race down at Keeneland most recently in that Phoenix. Clearly the Phoenix form did not hold up awesome here, but at the same time it wasn't terrible because Whitmore came out of that race as well. Limousine Liberal was a complete no-show. He never looked like he had any chance, which again, just I thought he was interesting at a price. He went off at a fair-ish price. I thought he was going to be closer to 6-1, but he just never looked like he had any chance in there. And I had said on the NBC broadcast that, and I think I had said it in the stakes preview for this race as well. Realistically, if Roy H. and Imperial Hint showed up with their A games, Limousine Liberal probably wouldn't be good enough to get it done. But I didn't expect him to just be completely flat like this. He just never looked like he was comfortable, and I don't want to say comfortable, he just never ran. Disappointing effort there. Promises fulfilled, you know that there are probably bigger and better things going forward if he comes back as a 4-year-old. Haven't read anything one way or the other. But the top 3, it all sounds like next year they're going to be coming back. And if you knock on wood and hope that they all stay healthy, could you imagine a third showdown between Roy H. and Imperial Hint and then throw Whitmore into the mix as well out at Santa Anita? Oh, it would be fantastic. This division has sneaky been pretty solid over the past couple of years. It may not get the giant headlines that the classics get or the older horses or the filly division or whatever else it may be. This division haven't had a lot of fresh faces, but boy, the ones that have been around, they've been pretty strong. Roy H. repeats as Breeders' Cup Sprint champion and perhaps is going to repeat as an Eclipse champion for Sprinter for the males. He gets the job done in the 2018 Sprint with a 128 time form US rating and a 111 Beyer speed figure. Onto the filly and Mare Turf, a full field of 14. The turf course was really a big headline down at Churchill Downs this weekend, simply because of all the rain that came through during the week. It really led to a much softer than I think anticipated from anyone, including the Europeans. Turf course, particularly, I maintain, I don't think the inside down on the hedge is where you wanted to be because those temporary rails were out for the majority of the week when the horses were working over it. It slopes down, it drains down. The inside was going to retain most of that moisture. At any rate, here is the field of 14, and really this was a fascinating case because you had a couple of horses coming in from Europe, most notably Wild Illusion and Magic Wand. They were the kind of horses that you looked at and said, from a class standpoint and what they've accomplished over there, they stack up very well. But then here you had a five-headed monster for Chad Brown, and let's call a spade a spade. That charge was led by Sister Charlie, who has been nothing but consistent since she got here on day one for Chad Brown. Ultimately, we had a pretty good duel down the lane between one of the Euros and one of Chad's. Here's the stretch run.
Wild Illusion comes into the stretch 3 wide, then 4 Star Crook, Sister Charlie on the far outside. Into the final furlong, a raving beauty, trying to hold off Wild Illusion, and here she comes. Sister Charlie is there too, and then it's Magic Wand, a 16th to go. Here comes Wild Illusion after a raving beauty. Sister Charlie on the far outside. The three of them coming down to the line, and it is Sister Charlie who ran down Wild Illusion in the last strides to do it.
Sister Charlie gets the job done at odds of 3-1 as the second choice in the filly in Mare Turf. She gets the job done over Wild Illusion coming in here for Godolphin, the betting favorite at odds of 5-2. She runs second, and the third place finisher, another Chad, a raving beauty, the pace setter. She's 11-1 and she runs third. Let's talk about Sister Charlie at this point. She is a 4-year-old filly who, again, really hasn't done a heck of a lot wrong. She is 7 of 11 lifetime, 10 times in the exacta, over $2.5 million in career earnings, owned by Peter M. Brandt, trained by Chad Brown, bred by, I've butchered this every time, I'm going to butcher it again, I'm sure, Écurie des Monceaux, that's just taking a shot, in Ireland. Ridden victory by John Velasquez, and you see the pedigree at the bottom of the horse card. She's by my boy Charlie out of a Galileo mare named Starlet's Sister. From a speed figure standpoint, again, kind of what you've come to expect from Sister Charlie. Rock solid. 125 time form US rating, 103 Beyer speed figure. Wild Illusion, the runner-up, a 124 time form US rating, 103 Beyer speed figure, and a Raving Beauty, a 123 time form US rating, and a 102 Beyer speed figure. Aidan O'Brien runs 4th and 5th with Magic Wand and Athena. Sister Charlie, again, she's just rock solid. She shows up and runs her race more often than not. I was slightly concerned about the distance and how would she handle that. I thought she was better, or let's say at her absolute best, going a slightly shorter distance, maybe in that 1 3/16, 1 1/4 range as opposed to a 1 3/8. Didn't seem to phase her. She comes home in 12:03 over testing ground. Thought this was a big league effort. Wild Illusion, considering the antics that she had prior to the race, where she was very reluctant to load into the gate. She stood around. They had to spin her, try to put the blindfold on. Did all sorts of different things. She just did not want to go into the gate. And it was probably about a 3-minute delay, maybe even 5 minutes. I'm trying to remember. But the fact that she ran as well as she did, I think, just speaks volumes about her ability. She's just a little bit of a nut out there. She's a 3-year-old filly as well, so if they do decide to bring her back as a 4-year-old, you've got to assume she's going to take another step forward. And look, she's already a serious racehorse as is. If she does take a step forward, she's going to be a handful next year as a 4-year-old. You can say the same for the 2 O'Brien horses that ran 4th and 5th, Magic Wand and Athena. They're both 3-year-olds. They come back next year, they take a step forward as 4-year-olds. There's no reason to think that they can't be big players in big races all over the world, excuse me. A Raving Beauty, this was a very courageous effort from her, all things considered, over this sort of ground, at this distance, which is certainly too far for her. To only lose by about a length, I thought it was a great ride from Javier Castellano, put her right on the front. You see the fractions, 26-1, 51-4, 18-2 for 3/4. Nobody wanted to go. So Javier said, we're going to go on and we're going to back this thing way down, and over testing ground, it's difficult to quicken and get that thing going. Thought this was a really nice effort from her. She's better suited at the more middle distances, the mile and a 16th, 1 1/8, I think is I don't want to say the absolute limit, but I think that is pushing her as far as if you want a top level effort out of her. I don't think going much more than a 1 1/8 is ideal. This is still a big league effort out of her. As far as the rest of the field is concerned, poor effort from 4-Star Crook. That killed me. She was down on the inside. I maintain I don't think inside is where you wanted to be. Azira coming in, she took some considerable money. To me, I think a lot of that had to do with the fact that she had pretty solid form over testing ground in Europe, and perhaps that would translate. She had a brutal post breaking from the far outside. She ran fine. Paved got jacked up pretty good going into the first of the 3 bends. I believe she came out of that with some a couple of nicks and cuts. She's going to go back to California. They'll regroup and get her ready to go. You know, at her best, she is a nice filly. I think she's probably better suited for those firmer courses out in Southern California as opposed to the ones here in the on the East Coast, but particularly there in Kentucky. And the rest of the field, I don't have much to add. Sister Charlie is just rock solid. She has a nose for the wire. She knows when to time things. Again, 7 of 11 lifetime and 10 times in the exacta. How do you knock that? She just shows up and runs each and every time. John Velasquez with a beautifully timed ride. And again, Wild Illusion, considering the antics before the race, this is a pretty big effort from her as well. And a Raving Beauty, you get her back to some of those shorter distances. That's really what she wants. She's a mile and an eighth, I would say. That's the top limit for her best, for her A game. This was probably her B+. And you know what? B+ against Sister Charlie and Wild Illusion, not going to quite get it done. The filly and Mare Turf, it was a really fun race. It was a great battle down the lane. But ultimately, Chad Brown prevails. Shocking in a Grade 1 turf race here in the United States. Sister Charlie gets the job done in the filly and Mare Turf here in 2018. 125 time form U.S. rating, 103 Beyer speed figure. Let's button up this first half of the recaps. The first 7, or chronologically, it's the last 7 Breeders' Cup races from this past week. And we're going to wrap things up with the Dirt Mile. Take a look at the field. 9 of them were signed on in here. This was supposed to be the coming out party for Catalina Cruiser. John Sadler training, Drayden Van Dyke with the ride, the outside draw. You couldn't have drawn that up any better. Got good early speed, can go to the lead, can sit just off. Shouldn't have a problem. The question, there were 2. How would he ship? And what would happen when he finally had a test thrown his way? Outside of him, second choice City of Light. You know, on his best day, he's capable of firing a big shot. Question was, he'd only run twice. This was really his second race since, what, the end of May? Was he going to be really ready to go for a big effort like this? Down on the inside, hand is kind of forced Javier Castellano. Got the local hopes coming in, Seeking the Soul and Giant Expectations. You also had Firenze Fire, who we know what he's capable of on his best day. Ultimately, we got an absolute show from one horse in particular. Just didn't happen to be the 4-5 favorite. Here's the stretch run of the Dirt Mile.
The scene and coming on now, and Bravazzo swings up on the far outside, and Catalina Cruiser has thrown in the towel. It's City of Light who arrives at the 8th pole, 4 in front. Seeking the Soul, trying to close the gap. Bravazzo is third on the outside. City of Light and Javier Castellano by the 16th pole clear, and they've got it. City of Light has won the Breeders' Cup Dirt Mile by 2.5 lengths.
City of Light is awesome, winning the 2018 Breeders' Cup Dirt Mile. He gets the job done at odds of 5-2. Seeking the Soul, coming from well off the pace, runs second at 10-1. And Bravazzo, the 3-year-old, taking on the elders, runs third for the coach, Dwayne Lucas, at odds of 14-1. Let's talk about the winner, City of Light. He was most impressive in this spot. He is 5 of 10 lifetime. He's never been out of the money in 10 lifetime starts. 9 times in the exacta, $1.6 million in career earnings. Owned by Mr. and Mrs. William K. Warren Jr., trained by Michael McCarthy, bred by Anne-Marie Farm in Kentucky, ridden to victory by Javier Castellano. And you see that pedigree down at the bottom of the horse card. He's by Quality Road out of a Daher mare named Paris Notion. From a speed figure standpoint, this was a big-time effort. Stopped the clock in 133.83, a 110 Beyer speed figure, and a 130 time form U.S. rating. Javier rode him aggressively out of the gate, established that early position, set legitimate fractions, and just went on with it. This was the best version of City of Light I think you've seen to date. Michael McCarthy afterwards sounded incredibly confident going into it, and God bless him, because he was right. This horse went out there and put on an absolute show. Before we talk about the 2nd and 3rd and 4th place finishers, we have to talk about the 6th place finisher, who was the 9-10 favorite, Catalina Cruiser. I had mentioned it when we went over the Breeders' Cup focuses, and I mentioned it in this race. I picked him because I thought, just from a talent standpoint, I just thought he was probably the most talented horse in the race. But I brought up the idea that what happens when he finally, and I use this sort of term, and I hope people recognize what I'm saying. I don't actually mean it, but I go, what happens when he gets punched in the face? You know, everyone has a plan, and then all of a sudden you get popped, and the plan kind of goes out the window. He's sitting a perfect trip. What happens when those horses that he was just that far superior to out in Southern California, and he could just blow their doors off. What happens when those horses in this race don't stop or don't go away that easily? Then what happens? Well, we'll find out if there's something more to this story. John Sadler said he's going to go and get all sorts of scans and just make sure that everything is good. If there is no excuse, if there is no physical problem, this was an alarming performance from this horse, because again, you can be that, that bully on paper, but when the real fight starts, are you there? And Catalina Cruz, or maybe this was, again, not going, then nothing is concrete. Who knows? Maybe we'll find out that there was something else going on with the horse. But if there wasn't, this is another one of those instances where you would almost rather find out that something was off with the horse, because at least you would have an excuse. Because if everything comes back and checks out clean, this was not a good performance from this horse. Set a perfect trip, and when the real running started, he went backwards. He threw it into neutral and said no mas. City of Light, on the other hand, continued and just drew off. A next race for him has not been set in stone just yet. He will be, I don't know if he's going to run an entire 5-year-old campaign or if it would be something along the lines of try the Pegasus. I'm just spitballing. There's nothing been out there, nothing been publicized just yet. But City of Light, this was a giant effort from him. Seeking the Soul, I thought this was a very good effort from him, and I think it's going to set him up very, very nicely for a race like the Clark Handicap, which he won last year. Mile and 8's not a problem. Loves Churchill Downs. Don't think coming from all the way out of it is ideal for him, and now getting out to 9 furlongs with a little bit of a slower tempo early on, I think that's going to work wonders for Seeking the Soul. I think you're going to have to look at him if they choose to go there, which I'd imagine they will. I think he's going to be a live player in that spot. Bravazzo. I thought this was going to be a poor spot for him. I felt like longer distances were better for him, 1.25 miles, kind of a grinder, all that kind of stuff. When I watched the replay of this race a few times, I'm starting to wonder. I'm starting to see a bit of a theme here with this horse particularly, and he wouldn't be the first horse if this ends up being an accurate sort of assessment. I'm not convinced that he takes the turns particularly well. I feel like that's when he really visually looks like he is in deep water, and then he comes on again when he gets onto the straight. And again, he wouldn't be the first horse that this is the case for. But you go and you watch this and you look and you go, oh my goodness, he's going to run up the track. He might finish last. And then not only does he actually stay on to finish third, he actually looks okay at the end of it. You go back to the Travers. On the far turn, he is dead in the water. He is not moving anywhere. Only to finally hit the top of the lane, kick it in again, rally, and finish very, very nicely. You think of the Kentucky Derby. You think of the Preakness. I think there's something to be said about him perhaps not loving going around turns. Now, what does that mean for him going forward? I don't know. What's his ideal distance? I still wonder if a little bit more ground is better for him. But you know what? This was a good placement from Lucas, and I was wrong about him. I didn't think he would fit in this race. He got a big piece of it. He runs third. Firenze Fire, for one reason or another, maybe he was a little bit too close to the pace. Maybe the class finally caught up to him. These were much better horses up in the front that just, maybe they cooked his goose. I don't know. Giant Expectations, a little bit slow out of the gate. That's kind of been his MO. You have to wonder, too, is he quite of this caliber? And then the bottom three, I mean, they were prices in there. Trigger Warning, 7 Trumpets, Isotherm. I was intrigued with Trigger Warning. I think the shorter distances are ideal for him. I think Illman had brought this up, and I think he's correct. This race, probably not the right race for him. This is probably going to be too tough for him. And he didn't show the speed that I anticipated. And perhaps he just didn't have the speed that I anticipated for him to be forwardly placed. 7 Trumpets and Isotherm. They run 8th and 9th in here. In the Grade 1 Breeders' Cup Dirt Mile, City of Light, a giant performance from him. 110 Beyer speed figure, 130 time form US rating. So we're going to wrap this thing up. This is the first half of the recaps, the second 7, which chronologically would be the first 7 Breeders' Cup races from this year, will be recapped on the Friday program. So if you've been listening to this one here on Tuesday, live.drf.com, livestream.com, the Daily Racing Forms Twitter handle, at DRF Inside Post, or the Daily Racing Forms Facebook page, thank you for doing so. If you listen to podcasts like most of you do, YouTube, SoundCloud, iTunes, video.drf.com, or Spotify. You know all this. You know all the details. Over on YouTube, click the subscribe button. You get all of our stuff. Give us a thumbs up. If you're over on iTunes or Apple Podcasts, write us a review. Give us a positive rating. If you have questions, comments, concerns, at Bernier_Matt on Twitter. I'm usually pretty good, but I'm telling you, it's getting shorter and shorter, the fuse. It is what it is. It just feels like Twitter. There's a lot of negativity on Twitter. A lot of negativity. I guess that's just nature of the beast. Keyboard warriors. I will be back on Thursday to record the Friday recaps. We'll go over those 7. The only real preview, I can't imagine. I'd be surprised, just given how long these are likely to be. I'd be surprised if I went over any races. I will quickly throw in there another NFL week. What would that be? Week 10 trifecta, something along those lines. I believe 18-9 on the year. We'll see. That's another story for another day. Most of these will be broken up as well as individual recaps over on the YouTube channel or video.drf.com. So until I come back and speak again on Thursday and Friday, well, I say Thursday and Friday, recording on Thursday. If you watch it live, you'll catch it on Friday. Should be uploaded on all of our spots Thursday night, I would imagine, when it's all said and done, along with the new edition of Out of the Gate. So until that next time, best of luck however you play, whatever you play, wherever you play. This has been the recap edition of the Matt Bernier Show.